The ceremonial hall erupted into chaos as Queen Lyrale's exo-armor locked mid-stride, her legs freezing in place while alien dignitaries scrambled for cover behind crystalline pillars. Warning klaxons screamed through the air as her royal guard formed a protective circle around their immobilized sovereign, weapons raised toward the vaulted ceiling, where emergency lights painted everything in harsh crimson. "System malfunction detected," announced the armor's synthetic voice, its calm tone a stark contrast to the panic below. "Critical failure in mobility matrix. Immediate technical intervention required." Captain Voss stepped closer to the Queen, his scanner sweeping the gleaming white surface of her ceremonial battlesuit. The readings made his jaw tighten. "Your Majesty, the suit's core processing unit has suffered catastrophic damage. If we don't stabilize it within the next 10 minutes, the life support systems will begin cascading failure." Queen Lyrale remained perfectly still, her face visible through the transparent faceplate. Years of royal training kept her expression composed, but her eyes betrayed the fear building inside her chest. She had worn this armor to demonstrate humanity's technological prowess to the Galactic Council, to prove that her species deserved their seat among the stars. Now it threatened to become her tomb. "Can your technicians repair it in time?" she asked, her voice barely audible through the suit's external speakers. Voss exchanged glances with his second-in-command. "Our armor specialists are all back on the ship. They wouldn't make it here before the systems fail completely." Around them, the alien delegates whispered among themselves in a dozen different languages. Some pointed at the motionless Queen with expressions that ranged from curiosity to barely concealed amusement. The Zephyrian ambassador's tentacles writhed with what Lyrale recognized as their species' equivalent of laughter. "Perhaps," hissed the serpentine Krellian delegate, "humanity's technology is not as advanced as they claim." The words cut through the Queen like a blade. Everything she had worked for, every diplomatic victory her species had won, threatened to crumble because of a single mechanical failure. The irony was devastating, brought low not by enemy weapons or political maneuvering, but by the very technology meant to showcase human ingenuity. "Emergency protocols engaged," the armor announced. "Seeking authorized repair personnel within proximity range." The scanner beam swept across the assembled crowd, its blue light pausing on each face before moving on. Guards, diplomats, servants, journalists, none registered as qualified technicians. The beam continued its methodical search while precious seconds ticked away. Then it stopped. The light focused on a figure standing near the maintenance entrance, partially hidden behind a service cart loaded with cleaning supplies. The person wore the simple gray coveralls of station maintenance staff, their face mostly obscured by the bill of a worn cap. They had been so unobtrusive that even the guards had overlooked them. "Authorized repair technician identified," the armor declared. "Clearance level, master specialist. Approach for immediate system restoration." Every eye in the hall turned toward the maintenance worker. For a moment, nobody moved. The implications hung in the air like an unexploded bomb. A human, a simple maintenance worker, had the highest possible clearance rating for the Queen's personal armor system. The figure straightened slowly, pushing the cart aside with deliberate movements. When they looked up, several aliens gasped audibly. The face beneath the cap was unmistakably human, but scarred and weathered in ways that spoke of years spent in maintenance tunnels and reactor cores. Queen Lyrale's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the approaching figure, her mind racing through possibilities and implications. The armor's systems had identified this person as a master specialist, but that was impossible. She personally knew every human technician qualified to work on royal equipment, and this scarred stranger was not among them. Captain Voss stepped forward, his hand moving instinctively to his weapon. "Identify yourself." The maintenance worker ignored him completely, walking directly toward the frozen Queen with the confident stride of someone who belonged exactly where they were. Their boots echoed in the sudden silence, each step deliberate and measured. "Your Majesty," they said quietly, their voice carrying an odd mixture of respect and familiarity. "If you'll permit me to examine your armor's primary interface, I can have you mobile again within 5 minutes." The Queen found herself unable to speak. There was something about this person's voice, something that triggered a memory she couldn't quite grasp, The way they moved, the careful precision of their words, the complete lack of nervousness despite standing before royalty and alien dignitaries, it all felt hauntingly familiar. The system failure appears to be in the neural interface coupling, the worker continued, circling the Queen's position with practiced eyes. A relatively simple fix, but it requires manual recalibration of the connection matrix. How do you know that? Captain Voss demanded. The maintenance worker finally looked at him, and Voss felt his blood turn cold. Those eyes held depths of experience that belonged to someone far older and more dangerous than their current position suggested. Because, they said simply, I helped design it. Queen Lyreley froze inside her armor for reasons that had nothing to do with mechanical failure. That voice, those words, spoken with absolute certainty. They unlocked a memory she had buried so deeply that she had almost convinced herself it never happened. The maintenance worker approached the armor's diagnostic panel with movements so fluid and confident that it became obvious they had done this thousands of times before. Their scarred fingers danced across the interface with the speed and precision of a master craftsman returning to their life's work. This will feel strange for a moment, they warned the Queen, their voice soft enough that only she could hear. But I promise you'll be fine. The words hit her like a physical blow. She knew that voice. She knew those hands, even scarred and aged as they were now. Her heart hammered against her ribs as impossible recognition crashed over her in waves. Marcus? She whispered, the name escaping her lips before she could stop it. The maintenance worker's fingers paused for just an instant before continuing their work. Focus on staying still, Your Majesty. The recalibration is almost complete. But Queen Lyreley had seen that momentary hesitation, that tiny acknowledgement that confirmed what her mind was still struggling to accept. The greatest military engineer in human history, the man who had vanished without a trace 15 years ago, was standing before her dressed as a maintenance worker on an alien space station. Marcus Chen had been her mentor, her teacher, and for one brief, impossible moment in time, something more. He had disappeared the night before her coronation, leaving behind only a cryptic note about duty and impossible choices. The official story was that he had died in a transport accident, but no body was ever found. Systems coming online now, he said, his voice carefully neutral. In 3, 2, 1, the armor hummed back to life with a satisfied chirp. Queen Lyreley felt sensation return to her legs as the mobility systems engaged. She could move again, but she remained perfectly still, staring at the man who had just saved her life and possibly her reign. The alien delegates began murmuring among themselves, clearly impressed despite their earlier skepticism. The Zephyrian ambassador's tentacles had stopped their mocking dance, and even the Krellian delegate looked grudgingly respectful. Remarkable, said the Andromedan representative, her crystalline form chiming with each word. Your species' technical expertise is most impressive. Marcus stepped back from the armor, wiping his hands on a maintenance rag. The repair is complete, Your Majesty. All systems are operating at full efficiency. Thank you, Queen Lyreley managed, though the words felt inadequate for everything that had just happened. He nodded once, a gesture that was somehow both formal and intimate. Just doing my job. As he turned to leave, Captain Voss blocked his path. I'll need to see your identification and clearance documents. Marcus reached into his coveralls and produced a standard maintenance worker's badge. The holographic image matched his face, and the clearance codes were genuine. According to the documentation, he was simply another human technician assigned to the station's engineering department. This shows basic maintenance clearance, Voss said, frowning at the display. It doesn't explain how you had Master Specialist access to the Queen's armor. Emergency protocols, Marcus replied calmly. The armor's AI was programmed to recognize certain biometric markers in crisis situations. Sometimes the system knows things that aren't in the official records. It was a reasonable explanation, technically accurate and bureaucratically sound. It was also, Queen Lyreley realized, a complete lie delivered with the casual confidence of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of hiding in plain sight. Voss studied the identification for another moment before reluctantly returning it. Very well. But I'll be filing a report about this incident. Of course. Marcus pocketed the badge and picked up his cleaning supplies. If there's nothing else, I should return to my duties. He walked toward the maintenance entrance without looking back, his movements once again those of an unremarkable worker eager to avoid further attention. The Queen watched him go, her mind churning with questions she couldn't ask and implications she barely understood. As the ceremonial proceedings resumed around her, Queen Lyrelay found herself moving through the diplomatic rituals on autopilot. She smiled at the right moments, nodded when appropriate, and delivered her prepared remarks about human-alien cooperation. But her thoughts remained fixed on a scarred maintenance worker who possessed impossible knowledge and even more impossible clearance levels. The ceremony concluded without further incident. Treaties were signed, hands were shaken, and promises of future cooperation were exchanged in a dozen languages. Through it all, the Queen maintained her composure, giving no sign of the emotional earthquake that had just reshaped her understanding of everything she thought she knew. But as the last alien delegate departed and her guard began their security sweep, she made a decision that would have consequences far beyond this single day. She would find Marcus Chen again, even if it meant turning the entire station upside down. She needed answers. About why he had disappeared. About why he was here now. About why the most brilliant military engineer in human history was hiding among the maintenance staff of an alien space station. Most importantly, she needed to know if his presence here was coincidence or if forces were moving in the shadows that threatened everything humanity had built among the stars. As her guard escorted her toward the VIP quarters, Queen Lyrelay caught a glimpse of gray coveralls disappearing around a distant corner. Her heart skipped a beat, but she maintained her steady pace, giving no outward sign of recognition. The game, whatever it was, had only just begun. Later that evening, Queen Lyrelay dismissed her guards and activated the privacy screens in her temporary quarters. The space was luxurious by station standards, a suite of rooms with real windows showing the star-filled void beyond. But she barely noticed the amenities as she paced from wall to wall, her mind racing through possibilities and plans. She had spent hours researching the station's personnel database, using her royal access codes to dig deeper than any casual inquiry would allow. The maintenance worker named Marcus Chen, a different Marcus Chen, according to the files, had been employed on the station for 3 years. His background showed a standard technical education and unremarkable work history. His performance reviews were consistently adequate, but never exceptional. It was a perfect cover identity, so carefully constructed that only someone with her specific knowledge would have reason to question it. But she knew what she had seen in those familiar eyes, knew the way those hands had moved across her armor's interface with the confidence of someone who had designed every circuit and connection. The question was what to do about it. A soft chime announced a visitor at her door. Queen Lyrelay checked the security monitor and saw one of her personal attendants, a young woman named Elena, who had served the royal household for 5 years. "Your Majesty," Elena said as she entered, carrying a sealed message cylinder. This was delivered through unofficial channels. The courier insisted it was urgent. The Queen took the cylinder with steady hands, though her pulse quickened. The metal was warm to the touch and bore no identifying marks or seals. She waited until Elena had withdrawn before breaking the simple mechanical lock. Inside was a single sheet of standard station paper with a brief message written in careful block letters. Level 7, Section C, Maintenance Bay 12. Midnight. Come alone. No signature. No explanation, but the handwriting triggered another memory. Countless technical diagrams and theoretical papers covered in those same precise letters and numbers. She had watched those hands write equations that revolutionized human military technology, had seen those fingers sketch designs that kept their species alive in a hostile galaxy. Queen Lyrelay looked at the chronometer on her wrist. 3 hours until midnight. 3 hours to decide whether to follow a ghost into the mechanical depths of an alien space station or to maintain the careful fiction that Marcus Chen had died 15 years ago. She sealed the message in her personal safe and began to plan. At 11:47 p.m., Queen Lyrelay made her way through the station's service corridors, following maintenance maps she had memorized earlier. She had changed into the simple dark clothing of a civilian traveler, leaving behind the royal regalia that marked her as humanity's sovereign. Her personal security detail believed she was asleep in her quarters, an illusion maintained by sophisticated holographic projectors that would fool all but the most detailed inspection. The deeper levels of the station hummed with the background noise of life support systems and artificial gravity generators. Emergency lighting cast everything in a pale blue glow, creating shadows that seemed to shift and move as she walked. She passed through sections designed for mechanical access rather than human comfort. Narrow corridors lined with pipes and conduits, junction boxes that sparked occasionally, and the bone-deep vibration of massive engines keeping the station in stable orbit. Maintenance Bay 12 was exactly where the schematics indicated it would be. The door was unlocked, sliding open in her approach to reveal a workspace filled with spare parts, diagnostic equipment, and half-disassembled machinery. Emergency lighting provided just enough illumination to navigate without stumbling. Marcus Chen stood with his back to her, examining a piece of equipment she didn't recognize. He had changed out of the coveralls into clothing similar to her own, dark and practical, designed to blend into backgrounds and avoid attention. "You came?" he said without turning around. "Did you think I wouldn't? I hoped you were smarter than that." He set down the device and faced her, and in the dim light she could see the full extent of what 15 years had done to him. The scars on his face told stories of violence and hardship that made her chest tighten with unexpected grief. "This meeting puts you in danger, Lyrelei. It puts both of us in danger." The casual use of her given name hit her like a physical blow. It had been 15 years since anyone had spoken to her without titles and formal protocols. 15 years since she had been simply Lyrelei instead of Your Majesty or Your Royal Highness. "You disappeared," she said, the words carrying all the hurt and confusion she had buried for a decade and a half. "You left me. On the night before my coronation, you just vanished." "I had to." His voice was quiet but firm. "There were forces moving against humanity, against you specifically. My presence was putting you in danger." "What forces? What kind of danger?" Marcus gestured toward a pair of maintenance crates, and they sat facing each other in the cramped space between massive pieces of machinery. "Do you remember the Hegemony War? The human colony ships that disappeared without a trace in the Outer Rim?" "Of course. Everyone remembers. It was the worst military disaster in our history." "Those ships didn't disappear because of alien attacks or navigation failures," Marcus said. "They were sabotaged. From within. By humans working with forces that wanted our species contained to a handful of systems near Earth." Queen Lyrelei felt cold spreading through her chest. "That's impossible. The investigations found no evidence of sabotage because I buried that evidence." Marcus leaned forward, his scarred hands clasped tightly together. "I was part of the team that investigated the disappearances. We found proof that several high-ranking human officials had been compromised, turned into agents working against their own species. The conspiracy reached into the highest levels of government and military command. Why didn't you report it?" "We tried. 3 members of my investigative team died in accidents within a week of our discovery. I realized that the corruption went deeper than we had imagined, that there was no one we could trust with the information." The Queen stared at him, her mind struggling to process the implications. "So you chose to disappear instead?" "I chose to go underground, to continue the investigation from outside official channels where the conspirators couldn't track my movements or eliminate me as easily as they had the others, and you left me to face the coronation alone, to rule without knowing that my own government might be compromised." Marcus winced at the accusation in her voice. "I left you protected. By staying away, I made sure the conspirators couldn't use me as leverage against you. Your coronation went forward without incident because they had no reason to believe you possessed dangerous knowledge." "What dangerous knowledge?" she demanded. Instead of answering directly, Marcus stood and moved to a locked storage cabinet. He entered a complex code sequence and withdrew a data crystal that gleamed like captured starlight in the emergency lighting. "This contains everything we discovered about the conspiracy," he said, holding the crystal reverently. "Names, dates, financial records, communication intercepts. 15 years of additional investigation that reveals the full scope of the threat to humanity." Queen Lyrelei stared at the crystal as if it were a venomous snake. "Why are you giving this to me now?" "Because the conspiracy is about to make its final move." Marcus's voice was grim with certainty. They've spent 15 years positioning their people, gathering resources, and waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment is now. What kind of strike? A coup. They plan to remove you from power and replace you with a puppet ruler who will agree to humanity's complete subjugation to alien interests. The ceremonial armor malfunction today wasn't an accident, Lyreley. It was a test. The words hit her like ice water. A test of what? Of how the alien delegates would react to seeing humanity's technology fail publicly. Of whether your death or incapacitation would create the kind of chaos they need to justify immediate intervention. Queen Lyreley felt the walls of the maintenance bay pressing in around her. You're saying someone sabotaged my armor? I'm saying someone tried to kill you today, and I prevented it by being in the right place at the right time. Marcus sat back down, his expression deadly serious. The repair I performed wasn't just a system recalibration. I had to counteract a sophisticated suicide protocol that would have killed you slowly enough to look like equipment failure. Who? The word came out as a harsh whisper. Who's behind this? Marcus handed her the data crystal, and she felt its weight like a physical burden. Everything you need to know is in there. Names you'll recognize, positions you trust, people who have been lying to your face for years while planning humanity's downfall. She stared at the crystal, understanding that accepting it would change everything. Once she knew the truth, there would be no going back to the comfortable illusions of royal protocol and diplomatic ceremony. Why now? She asked again. Why reveal yourself after 15 years of hiding? Because hiding isn't enough anymore. Marcus's voice carried the weight of years spent in shadow and exile. They're moving too fast, getting too close to their goal. I can't stop them alone, and you're the only person with the authority and resources to expose them before it's too late. What do you need me to do? Return to Earth. Call an emergency session of the Human Council. Present this evidence and demand immediate investigations of everyone implicated. They'll call it a fabrication. They'll say I'm paranoid, that I'm seeing conspiracies where none exist. Then you'll have to be smarter than they are. Marcus stood, his posture suggesting the meeting was nearly over. The evidence on that crystal is unshakable. DNA samples, recorded conversations, financial transfers that can be verified through independent sources. They won't be able to deny it. Queen Lyreley remained seated, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was asking. And what happens to you? I disappear again. Back into the maintenance tunnels and forgotten corners, where ghosts like me belong. No. The word surprised her with its firmness. I won't let you vanish again, Lyreley. I need you. She stood to face him directly. If this conspiracy is as extensive as you claim, I need someone I can trust absolutely. Someone with the knowledge and skills to help me navigate the dangers ahead. Marcus shook his head slowly. I'm too compromised. Too many people want me dead. My presence would only put you in greater danger. You've been protecting me for 15 years from the shadows, she said. Now protect me in the light. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the space between maintenance crates and forgotten machinery. In the dim blue light, Queen Lyreley could see the man she had once known beneath the scars and years of exile. The brilliant mind that had revolutionized human technology, the steady presence that had guided her through her early years of royal training. The person she had never stopped trusting, even when the rest of the world told her he was dead. It won't be the same, Marcus warned. I'm not the man who left you 15 years ago. The things I've had to do, the places I've had to go, I've become something harder. Something that doesn't belong in palace halls and diplomatic reception. Then we'll figure it out together. She pocketed the data crystal, feeling its small weight like an anchor against her chest. But I won't leave here without knowing you're coming home with me. Marcus was quiet for a long time, and she could see the internal struggle playing across his scarred features. Finally, he nodded once, a gesture that seemed to cost him something precious. All right, he said, but we do this my way. No official acknowledgement, no public recognition. I remain dead to the bureaucracy while helping you navigate the conspiracy. If things go wrong, if the danger becomes too great, I disappear again, and you deny any knowledge of my survival. Agreed. And Lyreley? He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the depth of care and regret in his eyes. I'm sorry. For leaving. For the years of silence. For making you face everything alone. She reached out and took his scarred hand in hers, squeezing gently. You're here now. That's what matters. The lights in the maintenance bay flickered, a reminder that they were deep in the forgotten spaces of the station where normal rules didn't apply. But for this moment, Queen Lyrelei felt more secure and hopeful than she had in 15 years. Marcus Chen was alive. The greatest military engineer in human history was about to help her save their species from destruction. And for the first time since her coronation, she wasn't facing the impossible weight of leadership entirely alone. The Shadow War was about to become a real one, and humanity finally had a fighting chance. The journey back to Earth took 3 days aboard Queen Lyrelei's diplomatic vessel, 3 days of careful planning conducted in the privacy of her personal quarters while the official story remained unchanged. As far as her crew and security detail knew, she was simply reviewing diplomatic protocols and preparing for standard governmental briefings. They had no idea that a dead man was helping her plan the exposure of the greatest conspiracy in human history. Marcus had cleaned up well, trading his maintenance coveralls for the professional attire of a mid-level diplomatic aide. The transformation was remarkable. With his scars partially concealed by dermal patches and his bearing adjusted to project bureaucratic competence rather than technical expertise, he became virtually invisible among the ship's staff. Years of living in the shadows had taught him to become anyone he needed to be. The key players are clustered around 3 power centers, he explained during one of their private strategy sessions, holographic displays showing the political landscape of Earth's government, parliament, military command, and the colonial administration. Each group has been infiltrated at the highest levels. Queen Lyrelei studied the names and faces floating in the air before her. Many of them people she had worked with for years. Admiral Singh? I've known him since I was a child. He taught me starship tactical theory. His daughter was captured during a trading mission to the Outer Rim 2 years ago, Marcus said quietly. Officially, she died in a pirate attack. Unofficially, she's being held hostage to ensure her father's cooperation with alien interests. The Queen's hands clenched into fists. Using innocent family members as leverage was a particular kind of evil that made her blood burn with anger. How many others? 17 confirmed cases of coercion through captured family members, 11 cases of financial manipulation involving gambling debts and business failures, 6 cases of direct bribery, and at least 3 instances of alien technology being used for psychological conditioning. Each revelation was like a blow to the chest. These weren't strangers or distant political figures. They were people she had trusted, advisors she had relied upon, friends she had believed were loyal to humanity's interests. How deep does it go, she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Marcus manipulated the holographic display, highlighting connections and relationships that formed a web of corruption spanning decades. Deep enough that a conventional investigation would be compromised before it could begin. The conspiracy has allies in the judicial system, the intelligence services, and the media networks that would normally expose this kind of corruption. Then how do we stop them? We bypass the normal systems entirely. Marcus pulled up a new set of displays showing Earth's emergency governmental protocols. As Queen, you have the authority to invoke special wartime powers in the event of an existential threat to humanity. And once those powers are activated, you can order direct military action against the conspirators without going through the usual channels. Queen Lyrelei stared at the legal framework that would essentially make her a military dictator until the crisis was resolved. That's an enormous risk. If I'm wrong, if the evidence isn't as solid as we believe, I'll be seen as a tyrant who destroyed democracy to maintain power. If you're right and you don't act, humanity will be reduced to a client species serving alien masters for the foreseeable future, Marcus countered. Sometimes the greatest risk is not taking one. She nodded slowly, understanding the stakes but still struggling with the magnitude of what they were contemplating. What about you? If I invoke emergency powers, your survival becomes an official secret that could be used against me. Then we make sure it doesn't stay secret long enough to matter. The conspiracy knows I'm still alive now. My appearance at the ceremony was too public, too obvious to the people who would recognize my real identity. They'll be mobilizing resources to eliminate me before I can cause more damage to their plans. All the more reason to keep you close and protected, or all the more reason to use their attempts against me as bait. Marcus leaned back in his chair, and for a moment she could see the strategic brilliance that had made him legendary in military circles. If we can prove they're trying to assassinate a supposed maintenance worker, it becomes evidence of how far they're willing to go to protect their conspiracy. The Queen felt cold spreading through her chest. You're talking about making yourself a target. I've been a target for 15 years. The only difference now is that we can use their desperation against them. Before she could object, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Emergency lighting bathed the quarters in red as Captain Voss's voice crackled over the communication system. Your Majesty, we have multiple hostile contacts approaching from the asteroid belt. Configuration suggests pirate vessels, but their coordination and equipment are too sophisticated for random bandits. Queen Lyrale and Marcus exchanged grim looks. They had expected the conspiracy to move quickly, but this level of bold action suggested panic rather than careful planning. It's starting, Marcus said, already moving toward the cabin's emergency equipment locker. They're making their play earlier than we anticipated. How could they mobilize this quickly? Because they've had assets positioned for exactly this scenario. Marcus pulled tactical gear from the locker, his movements efficient and practiced. The question is whether they're trying to capture you alive for a fake rescue scenario or eliminate you entirely and blame it on pirates. The ship shuddered as the first enemy weapons found their range. Through the viewport, Queen Lyrale could see the bright flashes of energy weapons striking their shields. Her diplomatic vessel was well defended, but it wasn't designed for sustained combat against multiple attackers. We need to reach the bridge, she decided, but Marcus caught her arm. No, the bridge is where they'll expect you to go, which makes it the most dangerous place on the ship. He handed her a military-grade sidearm and a portable shield generator. We're going to the engineering section. Why engineering? Because that's where we can do the most damage if this goes badly. Marcus sealed his own tactical gear and moved toward the cabin's secondary exit. And because it's where I've spent the last 3 years placing insurance policies, Queen Lyrale followed him through corridors that rang with the sound of weapons fire and emergency klaxons. Crew members ran past them carrying damage control equipment and ammunition for the ship's defensive systems. Through the chaos, she could see the professional calm of trained personnel responding to crisis, but also the edge of fear that came with facing an enemy whose capabilities were unknown. They reached the engineering section without incident, but Marcus immediately began working at one of the primary control stations with the focused intensity of someone implementing a long-held plan. What are you doing? The Queen demanded. Giving us options. His fingers flew across the interface, inputting command sequences that required authorization codes she didn't recognize. If they board the ship, if they try to take you captive, we need to make sure the evidence reaches Earth even if we don't. You're preparing to destroy the ship. I'm preparing to transmit everything on that data crystal directly to Earth's emergency networks before initiating core overload. Marcus's voice was completely steady. The conspiracy can kill us, but they won't be able to prevent the truth from reaching the people who need to hear it. Another massive impact shook the ship, and the lights flickered ominously. Through the engineering section's viewports, she could see one of the attacking vessels moving into boarding position, its hull bristling with weapons and docking equipment. They're coming aboard, she observed. Good. Marcus finished his preparations and turned to face her, his scarred features set in lines of grim determination. That means they want something more than just destruction. It gives us leverage. What kind of leverage? The kind that comes from being exactly where your enemies need you to be. Marcus checked his weapon and moved toward the engineering section's main entrance. They can't complete their coup without either killing you publicly or forcing you to abdicate. A mysterious disappearance in pirate-infested space doesn't serve their political needs, so they'll try to capture me alive, which means they'll have to fight through me first.
Marcus positioned himself behind cover that provided clear sight lines to all the section's access points.
And I've been waiting 15 years for this chance to make them pay for what they've done to my people. The sound of forced entry echoed through the ship's corridors, followed by the distinctive whine of energy weapons and the shouts of crew members engaging boarders. The battle was moving closer to their position, and Queen Lyrale could hear the professional efficiency of the attackers as they overwhelmed the ship's defensive positions. Your Majesty, Marcus said quietly, before this goes any further, I need you to understand something. The man who protected you 15 years ago, the engineer who designed your armor, the advisor who helped train you for leadership, he's gone. I'm something harder now, something that spent years learning to kill efficiently and without hesitation. What you're about to see won't be pretty. I understand, do you? He looked at her directly, and she saw depths of controlled violence in his eyes that made her breath catch. 'Cause once this starts, once blood gets spilled, there's no going back to the way things were. The conspiracy will know beyond doubt that you're not the compliant puppet they hope to install. Then we better make sure we win. Marcus smiled for the first time since their reunion, and it was a predator's expression that belonged in the deep places where humanity's enemies learn to fear the dark. Yes, he said simply. We had better. The first boarders reached the engineering section 30 seconds later, and the Shadow War finally stepped into the light. The attackers moved with military precision, their black combat armor unmarked but clearly high-grade equipment. Queen Lyrelay counted at least 8 figures advancing through the engineering section's main corridor, their weapons scanning for targets with professional discipline. These weren't pirates or random mercenaries. They were special forces operatives with training that rivaled her own royal guard. Marcus waited until they reached the optimal position before triggering the trap he had prepared. Emergency blast doors slammed shut with crushing force, dividing the boarding party and isolating 3 attackers in the forward section, while sealing the others behind reinforced barriers. The separated group spun toward new defensive positions, but Marcus was already in motion, moving through the maze of engineering equipment with the fluid grace of someone who had studied every angle and approach. The first attacker went down without firing a shot, Marcus's combat blade finding the gap between helmet and armor with surgical precision. The second managed to raise his weapon but fell as the Queen's sidearm spoke twice, her shots guided by training that had never left her despite years of diplomatic protocol. The third boarder triggered an emergency beacon, broadcasting a rapid data burst before Marcus reached him. The man died with a device in his hand and a smile on his lips, secure in the knowledge that his mission had been partially successful. They've transmitted our location to their command structure, Marcus reported, checking the dead man's equipment with practiced efficiency. We have maybe 5 minutes before reinforcements arrive. Can we break through to the bridge? Not without fighting through the rest of the boarding party, and they'll have secured the critical sections by now. Marcus moved to another control station and began initializing the data transmission he had prepared. Better to execute the plan and make sure the evidence reaches Earth. Queen Lyrelay watched as the data crystal's contents began uploading to Earth's emergency networks through quantum communication arrays that couldn't be intercepted or blocked. The transmission would take 3 minutes to complete. 3 minutes during which they had to hold their position against overwhelming odds. The blast doors began glowing as the separated attackers applied cutting torches to the reinforced metal. The barriers would hold for perhaps 2 minutes against military-grade equipment, meaning their defensive window was measured in heartbeats rather than minutes. There's something else, Marcus said as the upload progress climbed past 20%. Something I haven't told you about the conspiracy. Now? You choose now to reveal another secret because it changes everything about how this ends. Marcus checked his weapon and moved to cover the door where the cutting was most advanced. The conspiracy isn't just about human politics. The aliens aren't passive beneficiaries of our species' subjugation. They're active partners in planning it. The words hit Queen Lyrelay like ice water. Which aliens? A coalition of species that view humanity as a potential threat to galactic stability. We're too aggressive, too innovative, too unwilling to accept limitations on our expansion. The upload progress reached 40% as Marcus spoke. They want us contained and controlled before we become powerful enough to challenge the existing order. The Galactic Council? Some members, not all, but enough to make the conspiracy possible. The cutting torches were nearly through the first blast door. The technology failures, the diplomatic setbacks, the military disasters that have defined human expansion, most of them weren't accidents. Queen Lyrelay felt the foundations of everything she believed shifting beneath her feet. How long have you known? I've suspected for years. I've had proof for the last 18 months. The upload reached 60%. It's why the evidence on that crystal is so dangerous. It doesn't just expose human traitors, it reveals the alien manipulation that made the conspiracy possible. The first blast door fell with a thunderous crash, and energy weapons fire immediately began probing their defensive positions. Marcus returned fire with mechanical precision, each shot dropping an attacker who exposed themselves in the doorway. But Queen Lyrelay could see more figures moving in the corridors beyond, and she knew their ammunition wouldn't last long enough to hold them all. 75%, she reported, watching the upload progress with desperate intensity. Not gonna be enough, Marcus replied grimly. A lucky shot from the attackers had damaged his cover and shrapnel had opened a bleeding cut across his forehead. They're going to breach our position before the transmission completes. Then we improvise. Queen Lyrelay moved to the engineering section's emergency controls and began implementing protocols she had learned during her military training. If they couldn't complete the upload from this position, she would make sure their deaths accomplished something meaningful. What are you doing? Overloading the ship's main reactor. Her fingers flew across the interface, inputting authorization codes that would trigger a cascade failure in the fusion core. If we can't expose the conspiracy with data, we'll expose it by making them explain why they murdered Earth's queen in pirate space. That's not a victory, Lyrelay. That's just revenge. Sometimes revenge is all you have left. The upload reached 90% as the second blast door began to glow under sustained cutting. Marcus had switched to selective fire, making every shot count as their ammunition dwindled. The attackers were taking casualties, but pressing forward with the relentless determination of people who knew failure meant exposure and execution. 95%, the Queen reported. They're through, Marcus called out as the second door fell. The attackers poured through the breach in a coordinated assault, their training evident in every movement, but they made one critical mistake. They assumed their targets would behave like normal civilians faced with overwhelming odds. Marcus Chen was many things, but normal was not among them. He went through the boarding party like a force of nature, his movements too fast and too violent for their tactical planning to account for. Years of hiding had taught him to fight dirty, to use every advantage and exploit every weakness. The engineering section became a battlefield where human innovation met alien-sponsored aggression, and innovation proved stronger. Upload complete, Queen Lyrelay announced as the final data packets transmitted to Earth, but her moment of triumph was cut short as the last surviving attacker triggered a device that bathed the engineering section in blinding light. When her vision cleared, she found herself facing someone she had hoped never to see again. Admiral Singh stood in the doorway, his uniform immaculate despite the battle raging through the ship. Behind him, more figures in combat armor maintained watch while he surveyed the scene of carnage with the calm expression of someone accustomed to making difficult choices. Your Majesty, he said formally, I'm here to rescue you from this unfortunate pirate attack. Rescue? Queen Lyrelay's voice was flat with contempt. Is that what you call murdering my crew and destroying my ship? Regrettable casualties in an engagement against criminal elements, Singh replied smoothly. The important thing is that Earth's queen survived the attack, though sadly her ship and many brave crewmen did not. Marcus remained motionless behind his position, apparently unconscious but breathing. The Admiral's gaze passed over him with the dismissive attention given to insignificant maintenance personnel caught in a conflict beyond their understanding. The data transmission, Queen Lyrelay said, will be intercepted and classified as a desperate fabrication by someone facing imminent death, Singh replied. Panic makes people say terrible things about loyal servants of humanity. The investigating committee will conclude that your final broadcasts were the products of a traumatized mind creating fantasies to cope with mortal terror. And my rescue by pirates who conveniently arrived just after my ship was destroyed will be seen as a miraculous intervention by patrol vessels that happen to be conducting training exercises in this sector. Singh stepped closer, his expression growing more serious. Your Majesty, this unfortunate incident provides an opportunity for reflection on the dangers of unauthorized diplomatic missions. Perhaps future travel should be conducted with more extensive security protocols. The threat was clear without being explicitly stated. Travel alone again. Make decisions without proper consultation, and the next rescue might arrive too late to be effective. I understand, Queen Lyrelay said quietly. Excellent. Singh gestured toward the corridor. If Your Majesty would accompany me to the rescue vessel, we can begin the journey home. She walked toward the door with steady steps, giving no sign of the rage building in her chest. But as she passed Marcus's apparently unconscious form, she saw his eyes open just enough to meet hers. His left hand moved slightly, tapping a sequence against the deck that she recognized from their years of working together. 3-minute delay. Reactor overload. All hands abandon ship. Queen Lyreley kept walking without changing expression, understanding that Marcus had activated the reactor overload protocol during the final moments of combat. Singh and his forces believed they had won, that they could control the narrative and eliminate the evidence of their conspiracy. They had 3 minutes to learn how wrong they were. "Admiral," she said as they reached the main corridor, "I'm curious about something." "Of course, Your Majesty. How did you know I was traveling through this sector?" "My itinerary was classified at the highest levels." Singh smiled with paternal condescension. "Royal security is more transparent than you might imagine, Your Majesty. Many people have legitimate interests in ensuring your safety, including alien people." The Admiral's smile faltered slightly. "I'm not sure what you mean. I mean the Zephyrian ambassador who seemed remarkably unsurprised by my armor malfunction. I mean the Krellian delegate who had detailed knowledge of human technological limitations. I mean the systematic campaign to undermine human expansion through convenient accidents and equipment failures." They had reached the docking bay where Singh's rescue vessel waited. Through the transparent airlock, Queen Lyreley could see more armed figures preparing to receive their prize, but she could also see the subtle signs of reactor stress beginning to affect the ship's systems. Flickering lights, vibration patterns that suggested containment field instability, and the particular subsonic hum that preceded cascade failure. "Your Majesty has been through a traumatic experience," Singh said carefully. "Perhaps medical evaluation would be appropriate before I tell Earth's Parliament that their most trusted admiral is a traitor working with alien interests to destroy human independence." Singh's facade finally cracked, revealing the cold calculation beneath his grandfatherly exterior. "Your Majesty is not in a position to make accusations. You are a rescued survivor of a pirate attack, grateful for the timely intervention of loyal military forces. And if I refuse to play that role, then you will tragically succumb to injuries sustained during the pirate assault, forcing Parliament to select a new monarch who better understands the realities of galactic politics." The reactor stress indicators were flashing red now, and Queen Lyreley could feel the deck plating beginning to vibrate with harmonic frequencies that meant containment was approaching critical failure. Singh's forces noticed the changes but attributed them to battle damage rather than deliberate sabotage. "Admiral," she said formally, "as Queen of Humanity, I place you under arrest for treason, conspiracy, and crimes against the human species." Singh laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Your Majesty is hardly in a position to arrest anyone." "Perhaps not, but I'm in a position to ensure you go down with the ship you helped destroy." Understanding finally dawned in Singh's eyes as emergency klaxons began blaring throughout the vessel. The reactor overload was entering its final phase, and even his superior firepower wouldn't be enough to escape the expanding sphere of destruction that would claim everything within a dozen kilometers. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Marcus Chen is alive," Queen Lyreley said simply. "He's been gathering evidence against your conspiracy for 15 years. That evidence is now in the hands of loyal human forces on Earth. Today's pirate attack has been documented and transmitted. Your alien allies have been identified and exposed." Singh's face went pale as the implications crashed over him. "That's impossible. Chen died years ago. Chen learned to hide in the shadows you and your masters created. He learned to fight dirty because you forced him to become something harder than the idealistic engineer you remembered." The ship shuddered as containment fields began collapsing in sequence. "And he learned to plan for contingencies, including the possibility that one final sacrifice might be necessary to protect the species he loves." The docking bay's emergency systems began sealing as reactor radiation levels spiked beyond acceptable parameters. Singh's rescue vessel was trapped, locked into the dying ship by automated safety protocols that couldn't be overridden in time. "This is madness," Singh declared. "You're killing innocent crew members." "I'm stopping traitors from delivering humanity to alien masters," Queen Lyreley corrected. "The crew knew the risks when they chose treason over loyalty. Through the chaos of alarms and emergency lighting, she saw a figure moving through the docking bay service corridors. Marcus appeared at one of the maintenance hatches, his face grim but determined as he began manual override procedures for the rescue vessel's release clamps. He was giving Singh's forces their chance to escape, maintaining the moral high ground even in the face of absolute treachery, but he was also ensuring that their escape route led directly toward Earth, where the evidence would be waiting to greet them. 30 seconds to core breach. Marcus's voice carried over the communication system. All personnel to escape pods immediately. Singh looked at Queen Lyrelay with an expression that mixed rage and grudging respect. This isn't over. The conspiracy reaches further than you know. Eliminating one cell won't stop what's coming. Then we'll eliminate the next one, and the one after that, until every last traitor has been exposed and justice has been served. Singh turned and ran toward his rescue vessel, his forces following in disciplined retreat. As their airlock sealed and engines fired, Queen Lyrelay felt strong hands guiding her toward the emergency escape pods where Marcus waited. "Time to go," he said simply. As their escape pod launched into space, Queen Lyrelay watched her diplomatic vessel disappear in the brilliant flash of contained fusion suddenly released. The explosion painted the asteroid belt in stark light and shadow, a funeral pyre for the conspiracy's first major defeat. "The evidence reached Earth?" she asked. 20 minutes ago. Emergency broadcasts are already hitting every human colony and military installation in the galaxy. Marcus checked their pod's navigation systems and set course for the nearest loyal military base. By the time Singh reaches Earth, he'll find a very different reception than he expected. "And us?" Marcus looked at her through the pod's small viewport, and for the first time in 15 years, she saw hope in his scarred features. "We go. We rebuild. We make sure this never happens again. Together. In the depths of space, their tiny escape pod carried the two most wanted people in the galaxy toward a homecoming that would reshape the balance of power among the stars. Behind them, the expanding debris field marked the end of one conspiracy and the beginning of humanity's real fight for independence. The Shadow War was over. The real war was about to begin. And this time, humanity would be ready.